Hi everyone, welcome back to my Criminology lecture series. In this video, we are going to learn about next family-centered crime, that is child abuse. We will learn about its meanings and its different forms. Child abuse means treating a child in a harmful, cruel, or careless way that causes pain, fear, or suffering to the child. It happens when a parent, guardian, caregiver, or any adult who is responsible for the child hurts the child or fails to take proper care of the child's needs. A child usually refers to any person below the age of 18 years. Child abuse occurs when adults who are supposed to protect and care for children instead cause harm to them, ignore their well being. This harm may affect the child's body, feelings, health, safety, or overall development. Since children depend on adults for care and protection, any behavior that seriously harms them or puts them in danger is considered child abuse. Now, for example, if a parent beats a child severely for a small mistake, it can harm the child physically and emotionally. Another example I can give is when a child is regularly insulted or humiliated by adults, such as being called useless or stupid, which can hurt the child's confidence and feelings. Child abuse can also occur when parents do not provide basic necessities like food, proper clothing, medical care, or education. For instance, if a child is left hungry for a long periods or is not sent to school even though the parents are responsible for the child, it shows neglect of the child's well-being. One more example is when an adult forces a child to do harmful or illegal activities such as making the child beg on the streets or work in dangerous places. In such situations, the child's safety and development are being ignored. These simple examples show that child abuse occurs whenever a child is harmed, mistreated, or not properly cared for by the adults responsible for them. It is considered a serious social and legal issue because it can negatively affect a child's physical health, emotional well being, and future development. Now, let us have a look at the definitions of child abuse. WHO, that is World Health Organization, defines child abuse as all forms of physical and or emotional ill treatment, sexual abuse, neglect or negligent treatment, or commercial or other exploitation resulting in actual or potential harm to the child's health, survival, development, or dignity. Whereas UNRC, that is United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child, defines or states that as child abuse includes violence, injury, abuse, neglect, maltreatment, or exploitation during including sexual abuse. To understand child abuse in detail, it is important for us to understand its different forms. The different forms of child abuse include 5 major forms, and these depend upon the nature of harm inflicted on the child. Each form harms the child in different ways, but all of them violate the child's safety, dignity, and developmental needs. Now let us understand this one by one with the help of the case studies. So the first form is called as physical abuse, which is very common that it will include injuries. So physical abuse refers to the intentional use of physical force against a child that results in injury, pain, or any physical harm. This form of abuse occurs when caregivers or other adults use violence as a way of punishment, control, or expression of anger. Physical abuse may include hitting, slapping, punching, kicking, burning, shaking, choking, or beating the child with objects. In many cases, the abuse leaves visible injuries such as bruises, fractures, burns, or internal damage. Now let us understand this by a case study. A 9-year-old boy named Arjun frequently came to school with bruises on his arms and back. When a teacher asked about the injuries, the child initially said he had fallen while playing, but over time it was clear that his father often beat him with the belt whenever he scored low marks in school. One day, the beating was so severe that Arjun suffered a fractured arm and had to be taken to the hospital. The school authorities later reported the incident to child protection authorities. So, this is a clear case of physical abuse because the parent intentionally used physical force that caused visible injuries and physical suffering to the child. The violence was not accidental, but it was used as a method of punishment. So now if we speak in criminological terms, this behavior represents violent victimization within the family and violates the child's right to safety and to protection. Now coming to the second form, that is sexual abuse. Child sexual abuse occurs when an adult or older individual involves a child in sexual activities for their own sexual gratification. Because children are not mature enough to understand or consent to such activities, any sexual involvement with a child is considered exploitation and abuse. It can involve direct physical contact such as inappropriate touching, molestation, or rape. It can also occur without physical contact such as exposing a child to pornography, forcing a child to watch sexual acts, or engaging in sexually explicit conversations. A 12-year-old girl named Sana used to attend private tuition classes after school. Over time, the tutor began behaving inappropriately. He would sit very close to her, touch her shoulders and back unnecessarily, and eventually began touching her in private parts under the excuse of helping her with studies. The child felt uncomfortable and scared, but initially did not tell anyone. After several months, she finally told her mother, who reported the incident to the police. Now, this incident is considered child sexual abuse because the adult used his position of trust and authority to engage in sexual touching with the child for his own personal gratification. The behavior violated the child's bodily autonomy and exploited the power imbalance between an adult and a minor. Such acts are categorized under sexual offenses against minors and are punishable under laws such as POCSO, that is Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act in India. And this act we are going to learn in detail in our next series. Coming to the third form of sexual abuse, that is emotional or psychological abuse. This refers to the patterns of behavior that harms a child's emotional development, self-esteem, or psychological well-being. Unlike physical abuse, emotional abuse does not always leave visible injuries, but it can cause deep psychological trauma. This type of abuse may include constant criticism, humiliation, rejection, threats, intimidation, or isolating the child from others. Children exposed to emotional abuse may develop anxiety, depression, fearfulness, or low self-esteem. Now, Rohan, a 10-year-old boy, lived in a household where his parents constantly compared him to his older brother, who was academically successful. Whenever Rohan made mistakes, his parents called him useless and a failure. They often shouted at him in front of relatives and told him he would never succeed in life. Over time, Rohan became extremely quiet, avoided social interaction, and started performing poorly in school. This case represents emotional abuse because the child is being repeatedly humiliated and verbally attacked, which damages his self-esteem and emotional health. The abuse affects the child's psychological development and sense of self-worth. In criminological and psychological research, such experiences are associated with long-term mental health issues and social difficulties. And the fourth type is neglect. Now, one may think, how is this even a form of child abuse? So let's look into it. And understand its meaning. So, neglect occurs when parents or caregivers fail to provide the basic necessities required for a child's healthy growth and development. Unlike other forms of abuse, neglect is usually characterized by inaction rather than harmful action. Neglect may involve failing to provide food, shelter, clothing, medical care, supervision, and even education. Children who experience neglect may suffer from malnutrition, illness, poor hygiene, or lack of proper schooling. Now, let us understand this further clearly by listening to a case study. So, Meena, an 8-year-old girl, lived with her parents in a small town. Her parents were frequently intoxicated and rarely paid attention to her needs. She was often left alone at home for longer periods without food. She wore the same dirty clothes for days and was not enrolled in school. Neighbors noticed that the child appeared weak and malnourished and eventually informed local child welfare authorities. So, this case is considered child neglect because the caregivers fail to provide essential needs such as food, supervision, education, and proper care. The child's physical health and development were surely affected due to the parents' irresponsible behavior. So, from a criminological perspective, neglect represents a failure of caregiving responsibilities that places children at risk of harm. And the last form of abuse is child exploitation. It occurs when children are used for economic gain, labor, criminal activities, or other purposes that benefit adults while harming the child's well being. In such cases, children are treated as tools for profit rather than individuals with rights. Forms of exploitation include child labor, trafficking, forced begging, child pornography, and involvement in illegal activities. A group of traffickers brought several children from rural villages to a large city by promising their parents that the children would receive education and better opportunities. Instead, the children were forced to work in a small factory for long hours every day under dangerous conditions. They were not allowed to attend school and were threatened if they tried to escape. This situation is classified as child exploitation because the children are being used for economic benefit while their rights and well-being are ignored. They are forced into labor and deprived of education and freedom. Such cases are often connected with organized crime, human trafficking networks, and labor exploitation. I hope all of you understood this topic. If you have any queries on this topic, please feel free to ask in the comment section. Also, do not forget to answer the practice question.